This is Matthew Cratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about Whitney Webb's recent comments on Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. But let me begin by saying that I've enjoyed hearing Whitney Webb as well as Mark Goodwin on some podcasts over the past few months, especially when they were on what used to be called What Bitcoin Did in these two episodes, which I'll link to in the description notes below. I'd say unlike many contemporary journalists, Whitney and Mark are not afraid to attack powerful people and organizations both inside and outside the Bitcoin space, including intelligence agencies, Tether, Palantir, and other groups and people. So much respect to her and Mark for their courage in doing so. That doesn't mean that I think they're always right, but at least they come at the space. They both come at the space from some unique angles. That being said, I think that Whitney makes a lot of mistakes in her latest tweet, which many of you have requested that I talk about. I'll link to it in the description notes below. Let me read the first paragraph here. The biggest banks and a cadre of spooky currency speculators have funded and now control most of the infrastructure underlying Bitcoin, energy, chips, ISPs, plus general crypto infrastructure, with the openly stated goal of having it be only an asset that you don't and can't spend. The U.S. government and the small elite faction hold most of the Bitcoin, and once their financial control grid is complete, inflate its price through the roof. So let's begin with the beginning of that phrase where she's talking about how the biggest banks control most of the infrastructure underlying Bitcoin, energy, chips, ISPs, etc. I would say that before Bitcoin, powerful governments and large corporations controlled most of the world's infrastructure, from money to energy production, electrical grids, ISPs, and chips. And after Bitcoin, in 2009 to the present, powerful governments and large corporations still control most of the world's infrastructure, including money, energy, chips, ISPs, etc. Like most modern things, Bitcoin uses electricity and it uses the internet. And that doesn't mean that Bitcoin's captured, it just means that Bitcoin uses modern technology. If anything, Bitcoin actually helps to incentivize the decentralization of these various areas that Whitney is worried about. So rather than relying, for example, on Bitmain in China or TSMC in Taiwan for chips or for ASICs, Bitcoin is actually incentivizing bringing chip production, in particular ASIC production, back to the US. And this is something that Jack Dorsey is working on over at Block, developing his own 3-nanometer Bitcoin mining chips, and it looks like it's already been deployed to Core Scientific and some of their miners, which is great. Bitcoin mining is also one of the best ways of incentivizing the build-out of electrical infrastructure everywhere in the world. We've talked a bit on this channel about what they're doing in Africa, path to electrifying the world. I'll link to this article here as well. And I believe this is about the company Gridless, which Jack Dorsey is also working on. Bitcoin also incentivizes workarounds to centralized ISP control. This is definitely an area that needs more work, but we already have interesting projects, for example, like the Blockstream satellites, which beam the blockchain from space, no internet required. If you're finding this video helpful so far, I just ask you to help to support the channel with YouTube's algorithm. Subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, share this video with a friend or family member. So what we see here is that this decentralization is actually getting better. The decentralization she's worried about when it comes to energy production, ISPs, chips, etc., that Bitcoin incentivizes the decentralization of this. We're not anywhere close to being done with this, but at least Bitcoin redoes the incentives that we had before. I go on to the rest of her tweet. The U.S. government and the small elite faction hold most of the Bitcoin, and once their financial control grid is complete, they will inflate its price through the roof. This is simply not true. The U.S. government and a small elite faction are not the ones who control most of the Bitcoin. Here's an updated Bitcoin ownership distribution map from River Financial, and we can see here anywhere from 81 to 130 million individuals own 12 million of the Bitcoin. Miners own something like 700K. Satoshi down here at a million Bitcoin, etc. Governments here at 500,000 Bitcoin. So she's just wrong about this in terms of the ownership. The ownership of Bitcoin still heavily skews towards individuals and toward I would say rather libertarian OG types who've been hodling for many years. Also, you don't need a financial control grid to pump Bitcoin's price. You don't need some conspiracy like this. You just need to buy lots of it, and that will drive the price up. So wealthy governments and billionaires will be buying, and that's because they want Bitcoin just like you and I do for its very strong monetary properties. Smart billionaires like Michael Saylor have already ported most of their fiat wealth over to Bitcoin. Let's hope that the really evil ones like Gates and Soros completely missed the boat. But here's the thing about Bitcoin. It's open to everyone. It's permissionless. I personally don't want the US government, the Chinese government, the CCP, Putin and Russia to own a lot of it, but they probably will anyway. In fact, both China and Russia, and Putin in particular as an individual, probably already own a lot of Bitcoin. They're both too smart to be accumulating just shiny yellow rocks, as they talk about in public. The US government, China, Russia, and global elites buying Bitcoin is what adoption of a new global reserve currency and asset looks like. You don't get hyper-Bitcoinization just from a bunch of math nerds hodling Bitcoin and larger actors never coming in. Global Bitcoin adoption means that everyone, friends and enemies, the good people and the bad people alike, will end up owning some Bitcoin. Whitney goes on to say these elites who have a lot of ties to the Epstein network, or I can pause right here and say obviously a lot of elites do have a lot of ties to the Epstein network. Rich, powerful people sometimes do really bad things. And so this in itself is not surprising, especially considering the quality of the quote-unquote elites we have to deal with, especially in the US these days. These elites who have a lot of ties to the Epstein network hold so much Bitcoin collectively, and when currencies implode, which is something the currency speculators who back so much key crypto infrastructure have provably done in the past. We've already debunked the idea that these elites own so much Bitcoin collectively, but I think Whitney's also wrong here about currencies imploding. Fiat currencies don't implode because of currency speculators or the elites. Fiat currencies implode because central banks print too much of them in an effort to fund government deficit spending. The whole world of the so-called elites is actually built on a fiat foundation and fiat standard, and they, of all people, don't want the fiat era to end, since that would mean an end to their Cantillon privileges. There's a reason that people like Jamie Dimon, at least until recently, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elizabeth Warren, and an endless cast of villains have been attacking Bitcoin for years. It's not because they're secret Bitcoin bulls, as Whitney seems to imply, who are getting ready to pump its price to the moon. Whitney goes on to write, when they collapse currencies, they will buy up everything they didn't manage to buy up during COVID, and then install their new and beyond Orwellian financial surveillance grid in place using Bitcoin as a reserve asset. Again, as we've already demonstrated, the elites don't own that much Bitcoin yet, but Bitcoiners actually do. And as Bitcoin continues to gain in purchasing power, what is actually happening is that a lot of freedom-minded Bitcoiners are getting wealthier and wealthier too, especially relative to closed-minded elites, many of whom still don't own any Bitcoin, which also gives these Bitcoiners the ability to buy up strategic assets, as Whitney is worried about in this tweet, and also to fund Bitcoin-friendly policies and politicians. Here's the thing, the fiat financial system is already an Orwellian financial surveillance grid. It's really, really bad in places like China. It's getting worse in places like the EU, the UK, and even the US. Bitcoin's base layer is open and transparent and traceable to a certain extent, but still far superior to fiat and every other crypto when it comes to being decentralized, permissionless, censorship-resistant, and resistant to debasement. And it's still possible to use Bitcoin, as I've demonstrated, in a really private way if you understand how UTXOs work, CoinJoin, non-KYC Bitcoin, etc. Most of this does happen on my website rather than this channel, but I have spoken here about how UTXOs work and UTXO consolidation. Again, Bitcoin is not perfect, but it is proving to be an excellent Trojan horse to disrupt the existing financial system. So if you want to be part of a true financial surveillance grid, as Whitney terms it, that already exists today. Just stick to fiat money. The real problem is fiat, not Bitcoin. And Bitcoin remains the best antidote to fiat that we have. Or does Whitney have a better solution that she would like to propose? Or does she just want us to keep using fiat? It's sort of unclear, at least from the interviews with her that I've listened to. Or is she about to endorse some dying privacy coin like Monero? I could see her going in that direction as well. I think it's easy to hand out black pills all day long, and it does help with engagement, and I'm guilty of it myself sometimes. But I think it's also much more difficult and ultimately more productive to remain generally hopeful and positive, and instead to try to teach people how to incorporate Bitcoin and related freedom tech tools into their daily lives, because Bitcoin is the best chance that we have to defund the bankers and the bureaucrats. And in order to do that, we need to remain optimistic and constructive. We might not win, but we're definitely going to lose if we get so black-pilled at the outset here that we give up before the real battle starts. Bitcoin is hope, as Michael Saylor likes to say, and Bitcoiners are definitely some of the most hopeful people that I've hung out with. And I would encourage Whitney to go a bit deeper into Bitcoin when she's tempted to publish tweets like this, learn more about how Bitcoin works, and then I think she could become a really great ally of Bitcoiners, emphasizing orange pills over black pills. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video, and let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.